I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the bright orange surveyor's stakes gleaming in the morning sun, 50 feet inside what used to be my property line. My name is Aaron Caldwell, and I had just stepped outside my 2-story farmhouse in rural Pickens County, South Carolina, with my coffee mug in hand, ready to enjoy the late April sunrise over my 12 acres of wooded land. Instead, I found myself staring at what appeared to be a complete redrawing of my property boundaries, ones that conveniently shaved off a significant chunk of my western boundary and pushed it directly into what I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, was my land. My wife, Hannah, had left 3 days earlier to visit her sister in Charlotte for the week, which meant I was alone to deal with whatever fresh nightmare the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association had cooked up this time. The HOA had been a thorn in my side since we moved here 2 years ago, but this was different. This was not about mailbox colors or unapproved garden gnomes. This was theft, plain and simple. I walked toward the stakes, my boots crunching through the dew-covered grass. The land in question was a beautiful 2-acre section that included a natural spring and some of the oldest oak trees on the property. It was one of the main reasons I had bought this place, actually. The real estate agent had emphasized how rare it was to find land with natural water sources anymore, and I had paid top dollar for it. As I got closer, I noticed fresh tire tracks from what looked like a truck, and footprints in the soft earth near the new stakes. Someone had done this recently, probably within the last 48 hours. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, making sure to capture every angle, every stake, every disturbed piece of ground. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patricia Henderson, the HOA president. A woman in her late 50s who seemed to believe that her position gave her authority over everything from property lines to what color socks people wore in their own homes. The message read, "Aaron, we need to discuss the recent property survey corrections. Please attend tomorrow's emergency HOA meeting at 7 p.m. at the community center. This is mandatory." I stared at the message, my jaw clenching. Property survey corrections. They had moved my property stakes and were calling it a correction. I immediately called my lawyer, Marcus Brennan, who had helped us with the property purchase 2 years ago. "Marcus, it's Aaron Caldwell. I need you to pull the original survey we had done when I bought the house." "Sure thing, Aaron. What's going on?" "The HOA has moved my property stakes. I'm talking about 50 feet inward, taking about 2 acres of my land." There was a pause on the other end. "They did what?" "You heard me right. I need that survey, and I need it today." "I will get it over to you within the hour. Do not touch those stakes, do not move anything. Just document everything already on it." After hanging up with Marcus, I decided to do some reconnaissance. I walked the entire boundary of my property, following where my actual property line should be based on the landmarks I remembered from the original survey. The old iron pins that had marked the corners were still there, but someone had placed new wooden stakes far inside my actual boundaries. It was not just the western side either. They had also encroached on the southern boundary by about half an acre. When I reached the western edge, I saw something that made my blood boil. There, on what was clearly my land according to every legal document I owned, was a brand new garden shed. Not just any garden shed, but an expensive-looking structure with cedar siding and a green metal roof. Next to it was a neatly tilled garden plot with what looked like freshly planted vegetables. I took more pictures and then walked closer. There was a small sign on the shed that read, "Property of Brenda Henderson, Brenda Henderson, Patricia's younger sister and the vice president of the HOA." Everything suddenly made sense. This was not some bureaucratic mistake or confusion over old property lines. This was a coordinated land grab, and they had given my property to the VP of the HOA. I felt my phone buzz again. Marcus had sent me the digital copy of the survey, and I opened it immediately. The PDF was clear as day. My property line extended well beyond where those new stakes were placed. The western boundary was marked by a specific oak tree with a lightning scar on its trunk, which I could see from where I was standing, and it was a good 60 feet past the new stakes. The southern boundary was marked by a natural rock formation that looked like a split boulder, and that too was well past the new markers. I forwarded the survey to my email and made several backup copies. Then, I called the surveying company that had done the original work, Palmetto Land Surveys. Palmetto Land Surveys, this is Jennifer speaking. Hi Jennifer, my name is Aaron Caldwell. Your company did a survey for me about 2 years ago on a property in Meadowbrook Estates. I need to schedule an emergency resurvey because someone has moved my property stakes. Oh my, that is serious. Let me check our schedule. There was typing in the background. We can have someone out there tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. The surveyor will bring the original records and do a complete verification survey. Perfect. I will be here. The rest of the day dragged on. I spent most of it documenting everything, measuring distances, and preparing my case. I also drove into town to make physical copies of all my documents at the local print shop. I was not taking any chances with digital files disappearing or getting corrupted. That evening, I received another text from Patricia. Aaron, it has come to our attention that you have been trespassing on HOA common property. Please refrain from entering the western tract until this matter is resolved. I actually laughed out loud. HOA common property. They were claiming my land was HOA property now. I texted back. That is my property according to my legal survey. I expect those stakes to be removed immediately. Her response was instant. The HOA conducted a new survey that corrects errors in previous surveys. The land in question has always been common property. See you at the meeting tomorrow. I showed the exchange to Marcus when he called me later that evening. They are doubling down, he said. This is actually good for us in a way. Every statement they make now can be used against them later. But Aaron, I need you to stay calm at that meeting tomorrow. Let me do most of the talking. You are coming to the meeting. Of course I am coming. This is beyond HOA nonsense now. This is fraud and possibly worse. Next morning, I was up at dawn, waiting for the surveyor. Jim Patterson from Palmetto Land Surveys arrived right at 8 a.m. in a white truck loaded with equipment. He was a man in his 60s with weathered skin and sharp eyes that had probably seen every property dispute trick in the book. Mr. Caldwell. Jim Patterson. I pulled your file, and I have to say, this is one of the most clear-cut surveys we have ever done. Natural landmarks, iron pins, the whole 9 yards. Let's see what we are dealing with here. I walked him around the property, showing him the new stakes. His expression grew darker with each marker we found. This is not a mistake, he said finally. Someone deliberately moved these stakes inward, and that shed over there, he pointed at Brenda's garden shed. That is definitely on your property. We placed an iron pin right about there. He pointed at a spot about 10 feet from the shed's foundation. Can you find it? Let me get my metal detector. 20 minutes later, he had found not just that pin, but all 4 corner pins that marked my actual property boundaries. Every single one of them was well outside the new wooden stakes. He took GPS readings, measurements, photographs, and wrote up a preliminary report right there in the field. Mr. Caldwell, I am going to put this in writing, but someone has committed survey fraud here. These pins are original, undisturbed, and they match our records exactly. Those wooden stakes are completely bogus. I would recommend you contact law enforcement. I am meeting with the HOA tonight. Depending on how that goes, the police will be my next call. Good luck. I will have the full written report to you by this afternoon. After Jim left, I spent a few hours working in my actual property, making sure to document my presence there. I was not going to let the HOA intimidate me into abandoning my own land. At 6:30 that evening, Marcus arrived at my house. He was carrying a leather briefcase and wore a suit that meant business. "Ready for this?" he asked. "More than ready. Let's go expose these people." The Meadowbrook Estates Community Center was a modest building near the neighborhood entrance. When we arrived, the parking lot was already half full. I recognized most of the cars. This was going to be a well-attended meeting. Inside, the main room had been set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the HOA board sat. Patricia Henderson was in the center, flanked by Brenda Henderson on her left and 3 other board members I recognized: Donald Marsh, the treasurer, Linda Keller, the secretary, and George Prout, the compliance officer. Patricia's face tightened when she saw Marcus walk in with me. "Mr. Caldwell, this is a members-only meeting. Your attorney is not a resident." Marcus did not miss a beat. "Actually, Mrs. Henderson, under South Carolina HOA law, homeowners have the right to legal representation at all meetings where their property rights are being discussed. If you would like to challenge that, we can adjourn right now and meet in court instead." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded curtly. "Fine. Take a seat." We sat in the front row. I noticed several neighbors whispering and looking at us curiously. Most of them probably had no idea what this meeting was actually about. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through the usual formalities, reading minutes from the last meeting, discussing the budget. I could tell she was stalling, trying to bore everyone into submission before dropping the bomb. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Now, we come to the main issue. As many of you know, the HOA recently commissioned a comprehensive boundary survey of all common areas and properties within Meadowbrook Estates. This survey revealed that several properties have been operating under incorrect boundary assumptions due to errors in previous surveys." I felt Marcus tense next to me, but he put a hand on my arm, signaling me to wait. Patricia continued. "In particular, the property owned by Aaron Caldwell at 842 Oak Ridge Lane has been found to have significant discrepancies. What Mr. Caldwell believed to be his property actually extends into HOA common land. We have corrected the boundary markers to reflect the accurate property lines." A murmur went through the crowd. Patricia held up her hand. "I know this seems dramatic, but we must follow the law. The HOA is prepared to work with Mr. Caldwell to resolve this matter amicably." Marcus stood up. "May I address the board?" Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. "State your name for the record." "Marcus Brennan, attorney for Aaron Caldwell." "Mrs. Henderson, you mentioned that the HOA commissioned a comprehensive survey. May I see a copy of this survey and the credentials of the surveyor who performed it?" Patricia glanced at Brenda, who shuffled through some papers. "We will provide that in due course." Due course is not acceptable when you are accusing my client of occupying HOA land and have already moved his legal property boundaries. I would like to see that survey right now, along with the name of the licensed surveyor. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching now. Brenda finally spoke up, her voice defensive. "The survey was conducted by a certified professional. We have it on file." "Then produce it," Marcus said calmly. Another whispered conversation between Patricia and Brenda. Then Patricia said, "We do not have it with us tonight." You called an emergency meeting to discuss property boundaries, accused my client of trespassing, and you do not have the survey with you. Marcus let that hang in the air. That seems rather convenient. Let me share what we do have. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. This is the original survey conducted by Palmetto Land Surveys when Mr. Caldwell purchased his property 2 years ago. Palmetto Land Surveys is one of the most respected surveying companies in South Carolina, licensed and bonded. This survey clearly shows that Mr. Caldwell's property extends to specific natural landmarks and iron boundary pins. He held up photos. These are the iron pins that were placed by the surveyor and that remain undisturbed to this day. We had Palmetto Land Surveys back out this morning to verify their original work. They confirmed that all original markers are intact and that the wooden stakes recently placed on Mr. Caldwell's property are fraudulent. The murmuring in the room grew louder. Marcus continued, "Furthermore, we have documented that a structure, specifically a garden shed, has been erected on Mr. Caldwell's property without his permission. This shed belongs to Brenda Henderson, who coincidentally is the vice president of this HOA board." Brenda's face flushed red. "That is not true. That shed is on HOA common property." Marcus turned to face her directly. "According to what survey, Mrs. Henderson? The one you cannot produce, because according to every legal survey on file with the county, that shed is on private property belonging to Aaron Caldwell." Patricia tried to regain control. "This is all a misunderstanding. We will review the surveys and clarify the situation." "There is nothing to clarify," I said, standing up. "I had stayed quiet long enough. You moved my property stakes. You took 2 acres of my land, including a natural spring and old-growth trees. You gave that land to your sister so she could build her little garden. This is not a mistake. This is theft." "How dare you?" Patricia's composure finally cracked. "This HOA has every right to correct property boundaries. Not when those boundaries are legally established and recorded with the county." Marcus shot back. "What you have done is survey fraud at minimum and potentially criminal trespass and theft. If that survey you claim to have exists, produce it now. Otherwise, I am advising my client to file criminal charges tomorrow morning." The room erupted in conversation. Several residents were standing now, arguing with each other. I heard someone say, "If they did this to Aaron, what about our properties?" Donald Marsh, the treasurer who had been silent until now, leaned over to whisper something to Patricia. She shook her head violently, but he kept talking. Finally, he stood up. "I think we need to table this discussion and consult with the HOA's attorney. This has gotten out of hand." "No," I said firmly. "This ends tonight. Either you produce a legitimate survey that contradicts mine, or you admit that you moved my stakes illegally and you remove that shed from my property immediately." Patricia stood up, her face pale. "This meeting is adjourned. We will notify all parties of the next steps." "Not good enough," Marcus said. "Mr. Caldwell, I think it is time to involve the sheriff's department." That got everyone's attention. Patricia looked genuinely scared now. "There is no need for that. We can resolve this privately. You moved property boundaries and built a structure on land that does not belong to you or the HOA. That is not a private matter. That is a criminal matter." Linda Keller, the secretary, suddenly spoke up. She was a thin woman in her early 60s who had always seemed uncomfortable in her role. "Patricia, maybe we should just admit what happened." "Linda, be quiet," Patricia hissed. But Linda did not be quiet. She looked at the crowd, then at me. "There was no new survey. Brenda wanted that piece of land for her garden because of the spring, and Patricia convinced us that we could just move the stakes a little bit, and no one would notice." She said the property lines were probably wrong anyway because they were so old. The room went dead silent. Patricia looked like she might faint. Brenda had her head in her hands. "You are lying," Patricia said weakly, but everyone could tell the truth had just come out. George Prout stood up, looking disgusted. "I am resigning from this board effective immediately. I did not sign up for this." He walked out, and several other residents followed him. Marcus looked at Patricia and Brenda. "I strongly suggest you consult with an attorney tonight. Mr. Caldwell will be filing a complaint with the Sheriff's Department tomorrow morning, and we will be pursuing civil action for damages, legal fees, and the cost of restoring the property to its original condition." I added, "And that shed better be gone from my property within 48 hours, or I will have it removed myself and bill you for it." We left the meeting while Patricia and Brenda were still trying to deal with the fallout. Other residents stopped us in the parking lot, asking questions, expressing support, and several mentioned that they were going to check their own property lines now. The next morning, I drove to the Pickens County Sheriff's Office and filed a formal complaint. Deputy Carlos Martinez took my statement and reviewed all the documentation I brought with me. "This is pretty clear-cut," he said. "Survey fraud, criminal trespass, possibly theft depending on the value of the land. We will open an investigation." "How long will that take?" "Given how well documented everything is, probably not long. We will need to interview the HOA board members and get their statements. If what you are saying checks out, and it looks like it will, we will likely be filing charges." "Good. I want this on record so they cannot do it to anyone else." 2 days later, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. It was Donald Marsh, the HOA treasurer. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Donald Marsh. I want you to know that Patricia Henderson and Brenda Henderson have both resigned from the HOA board effective immediately. The remaining board members, myself included, would like to meet with you and your attorney to resolve this matter." "What about the sheriff's investigation?" "That is proceeding as it should. But regardless of the criminal side, the HOA wants to make this right. The shed has been removed from your property. We are having a licensed surveyor come out to verify all boundaries in the neighborhood, and we would like to discuss compensation for what you have been through." Marcus and I met with the new interim board the following week. They were noticeably more humble and professional than Patricia had been. They presented a settlement offer that included reimbursement for all my legal fees, the cost of my surveys, compensation for emotional distress, and a formal written apology to be sent to all HOA members explaining what had happened. "We also want you to know," Donald said, "that we are implementing new policies to prevent this from ever happening again. All HOA actions affecting property boundaries will now require approval from an independent attorney and verification from a licensed surveyor. And no board member can benefit personally from any HOA action." "You should have had those policies from the beginning," I said. "You are absolutely right. We failed in our oversight, and several of us are questioning whether we should continue on the board at all." Marcus reviewed the settlement. "This is acceptable with one addition. I want a clause stating that if Mr. Caldwell has any future disputes with the HOA, all his legal fees will be covered by the HOA regardless of outcome." Donald nodded. "Done." We signed the settlement agreement. As we were leaving, Donald pulled me aside. "I am sorry, Aaron. I should have spoken up earlier. Patricia had a way of steamrolling everyone, and I convinced myself it was not my problem. I was wrong. Just make sure this never happens to anyone else." The criminal investigation took about 6 weeks. During that time, Hannah came home from her sister's place and was absolutely furious when I told her what had happened. She immediately wanted to go confront Patricia and Brenda, but I convinced her that the legal system was handling it. 2 acres, Aaron. They tried to steal 2 acres of our land. I know, but it is being taken care of. They are not getting away with it. In mid-June, Deputy Martinez called me. Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to give you an update. The investigation has concluded, and the district attorney is filing charges against Patricia Henderson and Brenda Henderson. Patricia is being charged with survey fraud and conspiracy to commit theft. Brenda is being charged with criminal trespass and conspiracy to commit theft. What are they looking at for sentencing? Survey fraud is a felony in South Carolina with potential prison time. The other charges are misdemeanors but serious ones. If convicted, they are looking at fines, possible jail time, and definitely probation. They will also have to make restitution. Good. When is the court date? Arraignment is in 2 weeks. You will probably be called as a witness when it goes to trial, assuming it does not plead out. The arraignment was a brief affair. Both Patricia and Brenda showed up with their own lawyers and pleaded not guilty. The judge set bail, which they both posted, and scheduled a preliminary hearing for August. Over the summer, I focused on enjoying my property, the property that was rightfully mine. I built a small walking trail through the 2 acres they had tried to steal, making sure to put up a nice bench near the spring. Hannah planted wildflowers along the trail, and we spent many evenings just sitting there, enjoying the peace. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had transformed. Patricia and Brenda had resigned, and several other board members had followed. A completely new board was elected, made up of residents who actually cared about the community rather than power tripping. The new president was a retired teacher named Robert Young, who had a reputation for fairness and common sense. One of the first things the new board did was commission a professional survey of all common areas and verify all property boundaries. 3 other properties were found to have minor encroachment issues, but these were honest mistakes from decades ago, and the board worked with the affected homeowners to resolve everything fairly. In late July, I got a call from Marcus. Aaron, the prosecutor called. Patricia and Brenda want to plead guilty to lesser charges and avoid trial. What are they offering? Patricia would plead guilty to attempted fraud and pay a fine of $10,000 plus restitution to you. Brenda would plead guilty to criminal trespass and pay a fine of $5,000 plus restitution. Both would get probation, no jail time. What do you think? I think it is fair. They are getting criminal records, paying significant fines, and you will get additional restitution on top of what the HOA already settled. It also means you do not have to go through a trial. What about the message it sends? I do not want other HOAs thinking they can do this and just pay a fine. The felony charge and conviction will send that message. Survey fraud is serious, and this will be public record. Any HOA board member thinking about trying something similar will see what happened to Patricia Henderson. All right, if the prosecutor thinks it is a good deal, I am okay with it. The plea hearing was in September. Hannah and I both attended. Patricia and Brenda looked diminished somehow, smaller than they had been at that disastrous HOA meeting. They both formally pleaded guilty and the judge accepted the pleas. During sentencing, the judge addressed them directly. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Henderson, what you did was not just illegal, it was a betrayal of the trust that your community placed in you. You used your positions to attempt to steal land from a neighbor for personal gain. That is unconscionable. While I am accepting the plea agreement, I want to be clear that you are both fortunate that the victim in this case has agreed to this resolution. If you were before me on the full charges, I would have seriously considered jail time. Patricia was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay a $10,000 fine plus $15,000 in restitution to me. Brenda got 1 year of probation and a $5,000 fine plus $10,000 in restitution to me. Both were also ordered to perform 200 hours of community service. As we left the courthouse, Patricia tried to approach me. "Aaron, I just want to say I am sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. "You are sorry you got caught." If I had not had that survey on file, if I had not checked my property that morning, you would have gotten away with it. You would be enjoying my land right now, and I would never have known what you did. She did not have an answer for that. We walked away and did not look back. Life returned to normal after that, or as normal as it could be. The new HOA board was respectful and professional. They never bothered us about petty things, and when issues did come up, they were handled with common sense and communication. About a year later, I was working in my yard when Robert Young, the new HOA president, stopped by. He was carrying a folder. "Aaron, I wanted to show you something," he said. "We are putting together a newsletter about HOA best practices and lessons learned." I wrote an article about what happened with Patricia and Brenda, obviously without naming names directly, but making it clear what occurred and how we have changed our policies because of it. I wanted to get your approval before we send it out. I read through the article. It was well written and factual, emphasizing the importance of oversight, checks and balances, and respecting property rights. It also detailed the new policies the board had implemented, including required independent legal review for any action affecting property boundaries, mandatory conflict of interest disclosures, and regular audits of HOA decisions. "This is good," I said, "but I think you should name names." What Patricia and Brenda did is public record now. People should know exactly what happened so it never happens again. Robert hesitated. "Are you sure? I do not want to seem like we are piling on." "This is not piling on. This is education. Other neighborhoods need to know that HOA board members can go to jail for abusing their power." "Name names," he nodded. "All right. Thank you, Aaron. And thank you for not just rolling over when they tried to steal your land. A lot of people would have been intimidated by the HOA. It is my land. No one has the right to take it, HOA or not." The newsletter went out a few weeks later, and I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that it caused quite a stir in the local HOA community. Several other neighborhoods started reviewing their own policies and procedures. A few even reached out to me directly, asking about what had happened and how to prevent similar situations. Hannah and I decided to host a neighborhood barbecue that fall, partly to celebrate the resolution of everything and partly because we wanted to get to know our neighbors better. It turned out that many of them had been just as frustrated with Patricia's leadership as we had been, but had not known how to push back. "She made everything so difficult," one neighbor said. "I got fined 3 times for having my trash cans visible from the street, even though I brought them in within hours of pickup. She tried to fine me for having the wrong shade of white on my mailbox," another neighbor added. "I had to bring in paint swatches to prove it was approved." "Well, those days are over," Robert said, raising his beer. "The new board believes in treating people like adults. If there is a real problem, we will address it. If it is just someone being petty, we will ignore it." Everyone cheered at that. It felt good to be part of a community again, rather than feeling like we were under constant surveillance. The following spring, I expanded my property improvements. I built a small gazebo near the spring, creating a perfect spot for Hannah to do her painting. She had always been artistic, and the natural setting inspired her to create some of her best work. Several of her paintings featured the oak trees and the spring, permanent reminders of what we had almost lost. One day, while I was working on the gazebo, I found something interesting. Buried near one of the iron property pins was an old glass bottle, the kind that dated back to the early 1900s. I carefully dug it up and cleaned it off. Inside was a rolled piece of paper, badly deteriorated but still partially readable. I took it to the local historical society, where a preservation specialist named Margaret carefully unrolled and treated the paper. What emerged was a hand-drawn map of the property from 1923, showing the original homestead that had stood on this land. The western boundary was marked exactly where my modern survey had placed it, at the lightning-scarred oak tree. "This is incredible," Margaret said. "This map confirms that your property boundaries have been consistent for over 100 years. Would you consider donating this to the Historical Society? We would preserve it and include it in our county land records collection. Can I get a copy? Of course. We will make high-resolution scans before we archive the original." I agreed, and the map became part of the county historical record. But I kept the bottle, which now sat on a shelf in my study, a reminder that property lines are not arbitrary. They represent history, legacy, and the rights that people have fought to establish and maintain. About 18 months after the plea hearing, I received a letter from Patricia Henderson. It was handwritten on plain paper, and I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly honest. She admitted that she had let the power of being HOA president go to her head, that she had started believing she had the right to make decisions for other people without their input, and that helping her sister get that land had seemed like a harmless favor at the time. She wrote that the arrest, prosecution, and conviction had been devastating but also eye-opening. She had been forced to confront how she had been treating people and how wrong she had been. "I do not expect your forgiveness," the letter concluded. "I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, and I am trying to be a better person. The community service I am doing is at a legal aid clinic, helping people who cannot afford lawyers. I have seen so many cases of people being taken advantage of by those in power, and I realize I was doing the exact same thing. I am sorry, Aaron, truly sorry." I showed the letter to Hannah. "What do you think?" "I think she is sorry," Hannah said, "but that does not change what she did. Maybe she has learned from it, maybe she has not. That is not our problem anymore." She was right. I filed the letter away and moved on. Patricia's redemption, or lack thereof, was her own journey. Mine was about protecting what was mine and making sure that no one could take it again. The final chapter in the saga came about 2 years after everything started, when I received a check in the mail from the county. It was a refund for overpaid property taxes. Apparently, when the county had reviewed all the property boundaries in Meadowbrook Estates, they discovered that several properties, including mine, had been assessed incorrectly. My property was slightly smaller than the tax records indicated, and I was due a refund for several years of overpayment. It was not a huge amount, maybe $500, but it felt symbolic somehow. Everything had been corrected. The property lines were accurate. The taxes were accurate. The HOA was functioning properly. Justice had been served. I used the refund money to buy materials for a new project, a property boundary walk. I placed small educational markers at each corner of my property, explaining the history of the land, the surveying process, and the importance of protecting property rights. I also added markers at significant natural features like the spring and the lightning-scarred oak. When I finished, I invited the new HOA board to walk the property with me. Robert Young brought several other board members, and we spent a pleasant afternoon discussing property rights, HOA responsibilities, and the importance of balance between community standards and individual freedoms. "You have created something really special here," Robert said as we stood by the spring. "This is not just about your property anymore. It is a reminder to everyone about what matters." That was the idea. I do not want anyone to go through what I went through. But if they do, I want them to know that standing up for your rights is worth it. As I stood there, surrounded by my property, my community, and the natural beauty that had started this whole mess, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The HOA had tried to move my property stakes and give 2 acres to their vice president, but I had a survey on file. That survey, and my willingness to fight for what was mine, had made all the difference. The sun was setting through the old oak trees, casting long shadows across the land that was mine, legally and rightfully. Hannah joined me by the spring, slipping her hand into mine. "Worth it?" she asked. "Every minute of it," I replied, and it was. Standing up to the HOA, fighting for my property rights, and ensuring that justice was served had been exhausting, frustrating, and expensive. But in the end, it had reinforced something fundamental. Property rights matter, the law matters, and having documentation matters. The survey I had on file had been the key to everything. Without it, I would have been fighting an uphill battle with nothing but my word against the HOA's manufactured claims. Instead, I had facts. I had measurements. I had professional verification from a licensed surveyor. I had iron pins that had been in the ground for decades, placed by professionals who followed the law. And when push came to shove, those facts had won the day. The neighborhood had changed for the better too. The new HOA board operated with transparency and respect. Neighbors felt comfortable raising concerns without fear of retaliation. Property values had actually increased because people wanted to live in a community that valued rights and fairness over petty control. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had not gone outside that morning with my coffee, if I had not noticed the new stakes, if I had not had that survey on file. Would Patricia and Brenda have gotten away with it? Would they have done it to other neighbors too? How much land would they have claimed before someone finally stopped them? But those were hypotheticals. What actually happened was that I caught them. I had the documentation to prove they were wrong, and I was willing to fight. That combination had been enough. As fall turned to winter, and then to spring again, life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA handled actual community needs like road maintenance and common area upkeep. They stayed out of people's personal business. They operated within the law and with respect for individual property rights. And on my property, the 2 acres that Patricia and Brenda had tried to steal remained mine. The spring continued to flow. The oak trees continued to grow. The land remained as it had been for over a century, marked by legal boundaries and protected by documentation. I had learned a valuable lesson through all of this. Documentation is everything. Whether it is a property survey, a contract, a receipt, or a photograph, having proof of what is true and what is legal can be the difference between justice and injustice. I had kept my survey on file, and that survey had saved my property. Now, when I talk to new homeowners in the neighborhood, I always give them the same advice. Get a survey when you buy your property, keep it safe, and know your boundaries. Know what is yours and never assume that people in authority will respect your rights just because they should. Sometimes, you have to prove what you own and be willing to fight for it. The irony was not lost on me that an HOA, an organization supposedly created to protect property values and community standards, had been the one trying to steal property. But that is why oversight matters. That is why we need laws and courts and consequences for people who abuse their power. Patricia and Brenda had learned that lesson the hard way. They had criminal records now, permanent reminders of what happens when you put personal gain above the law and other people's rights. They had paid fines, done community service, and lived with the shame of their actions being public knowledge. I did not take pleasure in their downfall, but I did not regret pursuing justice either. What they had done was wrong, and they needed to face consequences. Not just for my sake, but for everyone's sake. Because the next time an HOA board member considers moving someone's property stakes or making up fake surveys, they will remember Patricia and Brenda Henderson, and maybe, just maybe, they will think twice. As I write this, sitting in my gazebo overlooking the spring on my property, on my 2 acres that someone tried to steal, I feel grateful. Grateful for the surveyor who did thorough work 2 years ago. Grateful for the lawyer who knew the law and was willing to fight. Grateful for the honest HOA board members who spoke up when things went wrong. Grateful for a legal system that, when presented with clear evidence, delivered justice. But most of all, I feel grateful for that survey. That simple document, with its measurements and markers and legal descriptions, had been the shield that protected my property rights when they were under attack. It had been the proof that turned my word into undeniable fact. It had been the key to everything. So yes, the HOA moved my property stakes and tried to give 2 acres to their vice president. But I had a survey on file, and in the end, that made all the difference. The land is mine, the law was upheld, and justice was served. That is all I could have asked for, and it is everything I fought for. The spring continues to flow on my property, just as it has for generations before me, and will for generations after. The oak trees stand as silent witnesses to the absurdity of humans trying to redraw boundaries that nature and law have long since established. And the iron pins remain in the ground, marking what is mine, undisturbed and unchallenged. This is my land. I have the survey to prove it, and no HOA will ever take it from me.